What is going on, alpha males? Today's episode was kind of a request from a patron. It was more of a question, but praise God, I think it'll make a good episode that many of you will glean from, because many people today, Americans and other people throughout the world, live in large cities. A large city to me is more than 150 people, but probably large realistically is 100,000 people. Some cities have millions of people. I have lived large chunks of my life in those cities for certain reasons, which we'll get into in the bio. On that note, I'll put in a quick bio, and then I'll also talk about some of my experience of when things go bad in cities. When things go bad in the big city. That's what we're going to talk about today on Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man, made in the image of God, strong, dominant, and in control. And we don't apologize for that. With that, I'm going to put in a short bio, and then again, I'll talk a little bit about some things germane to today's episode. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. So a little bit about the things I've seen in life as it pertains to civil unrest and rioting. So I joined the Marine Corps at 17, and that was way back in 2001. This was before we went to war. This was pre-9/11. And I was in Kuwait waiting to cross the line, waiting to cross the border into Iraq. We had not yet invaded Iraq. We had not yet declared war. But we knew it was coming. We were sitting in our tents on the Kuwait border of Iraq. I'd obviously already been through boot camp and basic training, and to my unit, it shipped out. We all knew war was on the horizon, but we didn't know exactly when. And I don't have a way to prove this, and I'm not going to go back and try and substantiate it now, but we were told, and I have no reason to doubt, that we were, if not the first unit, one of the very first units to cross the border into Iraq. And I was infantry, and I saw things that only a Marine Corps infantryman in war would see. I got to see some unbelievably awesome and horrible things. One thing I got to see was I was in Baghdad, and I was a specialized infantry, and I was attached to, let's just call it, a very special unit. And we were in Baghdad covertly before we destroyed it. So I got the very, let's say, unique perspective. I was blessed to see Baghdad as a functioning major metropolitan city, much as you would see in New York or LA or London or Tokyo. Now, culturally, those places are very different, but they all have things in common, and they are a functioning society and culture in a large metropolitan area. They had electricity, they had running water, they had culture. The neighbors in our safe house, next to our safe house, were British. From what I understand, there was a pretty well thriving Christian community and Jewish community before we went in there. It was a large metropolitan city. It was a big, big city with a large population. I just looked up, and this is one source, but it says the population was over 5 million in Baghdad pre-invasion. And I got to see that city as the units came in, as we invaded it, as we bombed it. I got to see beautiful marble floors destroyed under several tons of tank and war machine. I got to see a functioning society with happy people walking down the street and kids playing, to packs of ruling factions, call them what you want, tribes, radical Islamic extremists, fighting in the street, shooting in the street. A society where once cops and police cars meant order, to having no idea what side they were on, whether they brought peace or chaos. The sound of gunfire in the streets and buildings literally being bombed and crumbling. The loss of utilities, the loss of things like power and clean running water. And sadly, fields of bodies just laying there in the sun. And it didn't take very long. Got to see that perspective that most other soldiers and Marines that came after me did not get to see, because it was always a war-torn place when they came. They had never seen it as it was before, much like any modern city in America and Europe would be. They didn't get to see it descend. They didn't get to see the breakdown. How quick it was, how violent it was, how unpredictable it was for the people that lived there. But I'm blessed that God got me through that safely, and that I can share that with you today, and then we can talk about it and learn from it and glean from it, and that you hopefully never have to see anything that horrible. Also, went to work for LAPD, and as you might imagine, we had our share of rioting and protests, and I would call them more, especially after the Iraq incidents, especially after the war, I would call them more of civil disobedience and protests. But there's some violence, yes. We obviously trained for civil unrest and rioting. We obviously got deployed to civil unrest and what I would call more not so peaceful protests. Also dealt with this both in training and getting ready for when I was a private contractor. And I was the commander of a tactical team when the large metropolitan area we protected got shut down for COVID. And I got to see on American soil just a light sprinkling of civil unrest and got to see quite a high spike in violent crime during that time. People getting desperate, people protesting because of things going on in other cities. In Minneapolis, which is not where I was, which is quite a far ways away, there was some, let's just call it racial tension, and some of the people that served under me, in fact, one of the members that served me on that tactical team, one of their family members was killed, and let's call it a protest gone wrong with police. One of the family members of one of the men was killed, shot and killed. I got to see quite a bit of violence here on American soil. And again, it's alarming how quickly a city can change. Normal every day to chaos. So there's a few things that God has gotten me through. And with that experience, I'd like to share with you some considerations if you do live in that large urban metropolis. First of all, I'd say your basis should be the Bible. That should be no surprise if you listen for any length of time. Many men in the Bible, using today's term, bugged out. Do you remember the story of when Jesus went to speak in the synagogue in his town, and they were upset at him and tried to throw him off a cliff, but he escaped? Do you remember when Paul was let down out of the city in a basket because people were trying to kill him? Do you remember Noah? He bugged out. How about Abraham? God called him to leave the land that he was from to go to another. How about Moses? The Exodus, perhaps the largest bug out in history. God's chosen people bugging out. David bugged out a lot. He had to flee. He was being pursued. People were trying to kill him. He fled. He bugged out. So there's no contradiction in my mind in bugging out and being a man of God. It's not lack of faith. God many times causes people to bug out. Going back to Jesus, do you remember when Jesus was young? Herod's trying to kill the coming Messiah, the coming king. And he gives an order that all the firstborn should be killed. But an angel comes to Joseph and tells him to flee, go. And he does. He flees. He bugs out with Jesus. Again, there's no contradiction there. Now, let's wax philosophical here, men. Let's use the brain God has given us. Why is there this consensus in the survivalist prepper community? Not unanimous, not homogeneous, but mostly that cities will be death traps in a big disaster. Well, a couple of big reasons, I would say, aside from God Almighty and talking about things outside the spiritual realm. Flesh and blood, tangible things on this earth. Some of your greatest assets and greatest abilities to survive are men working together, human beings working together in society, in culture. But when you flip that around, if that collapses, human beings are the most dangerous predators on the planet. If you have never gone without food for a long period of time, if you've never lived through, going back to the experiences I talked about, if you've never seen people fighting over food and resources, because we're very blessed and we live in a time of overabundance here in the Western world in this time period in the 21st century. If you've never been to a third world country or experienced something like that, it's hard to convey how dangerous people can be. Even outside of war, just in a civil breakdown. So why do a lot of the survivalist community preppers consider cities a death trap after a collapse? Well, because people, and there's a lot of them, why will they behave badly? Perhaps. More so as a collective. Why will more of them be behaving badly than in normal times? Well, we get to the next big thing about cities. Cities in general do not produce the resources necessary for survival. Food, water. In general, some cities have urban gardens and people will do suburban homesteading and things like that, but the amount of calories consumed in a city is generally grown elsewhere in the country and brought in on ships, on rail, in semi-trucks, on the highways. What happens when that stops? What happens when you turn on the faucet and no water comes out? What happens when there is no food on the grocery store shelf? What happens when you call 911 and all you get is a dial tone? I think many may do bad things out of desperation, and there is a subset of people that generally do bad things that they can get away with, or they think they can reasonably get away with, and that bar, that threshold gets moved in times of civil unrest and mass disaster type scenarios. So I think those are two bigger reasons. With that, now if you do have to bug out of one of these large urban environments, the wrong thing to do is to wait until there's a bunch of civil unrest and have no plan and then run around like a chicken with your head cut off. So I'm going to talk about doing an area study, gathering information to make intelligent choices. An area study. Let's say you live in the Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth metroplex. Right? Let's say that you live there. Maybe do an area study of the past 150 years. Maybe last 100 years or 50 years. When have there been and what type of natural disasters? That's probably one of your main things. You want to study that. That often leads to secondary and tertiary problems. I got this, to give credit where credit is due, from Pastor Joe Fox of Viking Preparedness, but I think it rings true. He says the two main things you have to worry about in a lot of disasters, many disasters, is starvation and people behaving badly. So what I would look at is what has caused major unrest, disaster, bug-out type scenarios in your area. Hurricanes, tornadoes, ice storms, whatever that is for you. If you're in LA, earthquakes. But you get the idea. In the last several of those events, what areas have been affected? What areas have not? Is it likely that that's going to repeat? Also, when those things or other things happen, civil unrest, how many times has there been civil unrest in your city? What areas did it affect? Was there looting? Was there rioting? Where was it? Was it localized in certain neighborhoods? Was it widespread? There's a lot that goes into an area study, but start with the area study. Probably a better return on investment than buying cases of freeze-dried food. You should have that too. But start with the area study. And then especially if you're moving or plan to move to an area, that's really going to help out because you might get some good planning on where to go, where to settle. But that area study, looking at the past, and nobody sees the future but God, but making an educated plan and analysis based on prior information. You might even want to go old school on this. Maybe you listen to that episode, Sometimes the Analog Ways Are Better. Get an actual printout map of your area, an actual map. Maybe put it up in a room, on a desk, and literally take highlighters, colored pencils, whatever. Make an actual map. Areas affected by wildfire in orange, areas affected by hurricanes, tornadoes in blue, flooding, things like that, riots, civil unrest, red. You get the idea. Now once you have that map in that area study, the reason I put that before this should make this a little bit easier. Your getting out of Dodge plan, your bug out plan, your escape and evasion plan. All those areas that look really bad on that map, probably don't go through there. Right? Something that's fairly common in the military, but you may not be acquainted with. Don't just have a bug out route. Have a primary, an alternate, a contingency, and an emergency. Example. Primary. You get in your vehicles and you drive on the highway, the fastest way out of town. That'd be nice. If the freeways are blocked, destroyed, barricaded, gridlocked in traffic, alternate, surface streets. That's your alternate plan. Have an alternate plan of how to get out if the freeways are blocked and surface streets are still a go. What if all the streets are gridlocked, right? If you live in a city of millions of people, that's not an unheard of thing. And a lot of cities get gridlocked every day for a couple hours. And that's a small percentage of the population. Imagine almost everybody trying to get out of that city. And a few accidents. And what kind of havoc that will cause on the road system. Contingency. And they don't have to be in this order. I'm just giving you some examples that I've used in the past, that I had plans in the past. Just about any city, I think every city, will have some kind of rail line. Any kind of major city, anyway, should have some kind of rail line. Most people aren't going to think about that. The vast majority are going to try and do what they do every day. Like when there's no food, where are they going to go? Probably wherever they go to get food. Walmart, Trader Joe's, wherever people go to get food. So probably don't go to those places. If people are trying to get out, what are they going to most likely do? They're going to try and do what they do all the time. Get in their car and go on a road, a street, a highway. If that's not feasible, and that's what everybody else is trying to do, don't do that thing. Think outside the box. Railways. Sometimes railroad tracks, a lot of times, will have access roads, like a literal dirt path. Hopefully you have four-wheel drive. But a lot of times you can use those to get in and out of cities. And at least get past where the gridlock is. That might be your contingency. Emergency, you might be using those Lamborghinis, just taking your bug out bag and leaving on foot. Probably, again, don't want to use roads. Easy target, easy picking. You're the guy with the backpack with food and stuff on the road. Except for a few cities that have popped up, in the past 100 years. If cities are older than that, many times they'll be situated on a river or the coast. But waterways, in general, were the highways before there were actual asphalt highways. How does water get in and out of that city? Can you use that route to get in and out of the city? That might be your emergency plan. Have a way to get out. Now, something not often talked about, I don't know if I've ever heard it talked about. The straight bug out of the city. What if that is not safe? What if things are looting and rioting and mayhem and all manner of sin and debauchery going on, and you don't think you can safely make it out? If you can't bug out of the city altogether, it may be advantageous to do some urban exploring before there's a disaster and have a fallback location. If I were looking at this, I would look somewhere outside of neighborhoods. There are places in cities that don't generally have a lot of people. That may seem strange to you, but people generally cluster and live in certain pockets of the city. There are generally certain parts of the city that are industrial. There are not a lot of people that are there most of the time. There are workers and stuff there on a given day, but probably less of an issue in some kind of grid down civil unrest scenario. Look for an area like that to have a fallback location if you don't think it's safe to get out of the city right away, all the way. Maybe have one or two in a different direction. But a fallback location, a rally point. Something I don't often hear talked about either is a panic azimuth. You might have a panic azimuth. Another thing kind of from the military, but things go really bad. And you've looked at the map, you know where you live, you know where you work, where your wife works. Include in that whomever you want. You've decided, unless there's some special circumstance, in general, you're going to exodus that city west. You're going to bug out west. So your panic azimuth is 270 degrees. Your family knows this. Things go bad, likely comms are going to go down. Everybody's just going to head west, talking about that rail line or that river. Everybody goes west when you hit the rail line or the river or whatever you've decided, highway number 1. I'm just making stuff up. Whatever that is for you. When you hit that landmark, you're on your panic azimuth, 270 degrees west. You hit that, and then you all have a rally point designated somewhere. So whether you hit it from the north or from the south, when you get there, you should know, we're meeting at the old abandoned grain silos. You have a panic azimuth, so again, when things get bad fast, people are not running around with their head cut off. If they know nothing else, they know go west. We hit the rail lines, we go to the abandoned grain silo, and then we'll meet up there. That panic azimuth, that fallback location. Probably good things to have. Let me tackle one thing right now. I'm not going to leave, I'm going to stay and defend my house. Especially for us red-blooded Americans who are well-armed. That's all well and good. You can be well-armed, you can be the best shooter, tactically savvy person in your city. If you live in a city, a large metropolitan area, how close is the next closest building to you? Think like your adversary. Think like a mob trying to operate the most efficient way. They're probably not going to stand with you toe to toe and shoot it out. They're probably going to take cover in the next nearest building. The logical thing to do would be to take an old trash glass bottle, a rag, and a fraction of a gallon of gasoline. They want to get really sophisticated, tie a piece of rope or string to it, swing it around, and lob it onto your house. If you live in a wood house or building with an asphalt shingled roof or anything that catches fire, they're not going to try and stand toe-to-toe and shoot it out with you. You're going to take cover from behind defilade, from behind a brick wall or a concrete wall or whatever the next building is, throw the Molotov cocktail into your house, onto your house, and just wait. You can be the most well-armed guy on the planet. Forget about prying it from your cold, dead hands. How about extra crispy? So the thing that I'm just never going to leave, I'm just going to stay and defend my house from a fire. So you got to think about that. There are times when you probably should leave. There are times when it's probably safer to stay in. But here's something I'm going to tell you about bugging out. As somebody that's actually had to bug out, it's better to bug out a month too early than a minute too late. So, have bug out routes. Again, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. I would have one or more fallback locations, rally points, whatever you want to call them. I would have a panic azimuth. I would have all that stuff pre-designated. SOPs, right? Standard operating procedures. And whomever you love and care about and plans to bug out that are old enough to comprehend it and do it, they should know that. My wife and I had this when I was the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Which I should mention, we did go through periods of civil unrest. We had a rally point between her job and my job. She knew the bug out plan. My wife is in, and was at the time, in corporate management with a master's degree, right? We're not running around with gas masks on all the time, but it's not that hard to have a good, solid bug out plan. Now, another thing I want to bring up, probably good to have caches. The last time I lived in a large metropolitan area, I had a cache outside the city, storing supplies when you're not there. Now again, hopefully this never happens. You don't need any of this information. However, if you do have to bug out, hopefully you go to your primary and just put stuff in your vehicle and you drive out of town. That would be great. If that doesn't happen, if you have a long way to go on foot, or you start out in your vehicle and you literally get stopped by a massive group of armed people and you get stripped of pretty much everything you have. Be nice to have a cache somewhere outside the city for many reasons. Maybe just to resupply. Maybe you live in a desert environment and if there's no grid, if you just turn on the faucets and there's no water coming out, you may need something as simple as a water resupply or a gasoline resupply. If the grid's down, the gas pumps probably aren't working. If you have a long way to go in a vehicle, maybe if it's hundreds of miles, maybe somewhere along that route, have some gas stored in a cache. But think about you. I don't want to get too specific because I don't know your situation. I don't know where you're bugging out to. I don't know your route, but think about these caches, especially if you have those rally points, objective rally points. That might be a good place for a cache in case you get there, something happened. You had to run, you had to sprint for your life, and you had to drop that pack. Now you're stuck hopefully with your EDC, which should be more than nothing. And now you've got a cache for at least some extra supplies. You know, what does a couple of gallons of water and a case of ramen noodles cost today? Not very much. What would you give for that if you hadn't drinking or eaten in 3 days? So think about that. Think about the caches. Ammo cans are meant to be watertight. You can get them and paint them with some kind of asphalt solution or something like that to make them a little bit more weatherproof depending on your environment. Just saying, something to think about. You got an old pair of footwear you don't really wear anymore, but it's still serviceable. It's still got some life left in it. Good footwear is important. Again, something you may just want to throw in a cache somewhere. A change of clothes that you don't really wear. Something like that. A couple of things. Cheap, easy, inexpensive. Put them in a cache. And camo that cache. Camo it by burying it. Camo it by putting it under a scrap pile. Whatever it is. And talking about camo. Camouflage. Urban camouflage can be quite different. The point of camouflage is to blend in. The point of camouflage is to not look cool in the latest black multicam. I would submit a better urban camouflage in most situations is going to be maybe a pair of Merrell's khaki pants and some kind of plaid shirt. Depending on where you live, right? Maybe that blends in or doesn't, but you get the idea. That's probably going to be much better urban camouflage than BDUs in black multicam. I'm not telling you can't have that stuff, but if your point is to blend in, that's like the opposite of blending in an urban environment. Unless you're Australian rappelling in the middle of the night, doing some kind of Mission Impossible stuff, that's probably not what you want to be wearing in this kind of scenario. If you're trying to blend in, if we're talking about urban camouflage. Have good functional gear, but it doesn't scream tactical. As you might know, the wife and I live as neo-nomads. I don't have as much stuff as a lot of people, and that's just fine. But I have one go-to backpack. It's what I use for big game hunting. It's what I use for going camping. The wife and I, by God's grace, plan on doing a stint in the Sawtooth Wilderness here pretty soon. It's kind of my go-to big backpack. It's also my bug-out bag. When I'm not doing those activities, it stays packed for bugging out. It's a dark forest green color. It's not camo. It's not crazy tactical looking. It's a good Eberly stock pack. But it blend in well in the forest, blend in well in the desert, blend in well in the country, blend in well in an urban environment. It just looks like a backpack. It's pretty good urban camouflage. So think about these things. Use some critical thinking here. If things are getting bad and there's looting and civil unrest and class warfare, if you have two vehicles and one's a really nice newer vehicle and one's an old beat up vehicle and you're trying to get out safely, maybe take the old beat up vehicle because you might be less likely to be the victim of a crime in that vehicle. Just think about the urban camouflage concept. Camouflage doesn't always have to mean the latest greatest camouflage pattern, and I like camo. I wear camo quite a bit, but there's a time and a place for it. Talking about camouflage, you don't have to worry about camouflage if you're doing a good job at avoidance. Talked about this a little bit, but avoid the issue to begin with if you can. And some things you can't avoid. Again, I assume if you're listening to this, you're at least basically into preparedness. You have some food stored up and some water stored up. If it's 2 days after a major disaster and everybody's clamoring for toilet paper, maybe don't go to the store. Avoidance. Maybe it is a short-term thing and you're just going to hunker down and wait it out. Or if you are going to leave the city in that urban camouflage, that khaki pants, a good pair of hiking boots, a good functional jacket, whatever the case might be, you might want to travel at night. One thing I've talked about before, I don't really think that night vision is a great idea for like a home defense, home invasion scenario. I just don't think there's time to utilize it. And then what happens if he flips the light on? I don't see that. I'm not telling you not to have night vision. That's why I'm bringing it up here. This might be a situation if you do live in a large metropolitan area, you may decide it's safer to bug out in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 a.m. And most people are going to be sleeping. Even people behaving badly have to sleep. So you're probably going to run into a lot less resistance, a lot less crime afoot at 2, 3 a.m. if you're trying to get out of the city. So avoidance, that's a big one. We talked about probably not feasible if people really want to get into your building, your wherever you live. Is it really defensible? If you think not, and you think there will be looting or rioting, or it's starting somewhere else in the city, get out early. Again, it's better to bug out a month too early than a minute too late. You see looting and civil unrest and rioting starting in one place and it's likely to come to you, don't be there when it gets there. Right? Don't be there when it gets there. Be gone. Be somewhere else. Be somewhere safer. Avoidance. We talked about the bug out bag. I assume, again, if you're listening to this, you probably have a bug out bag. My advice to you would be have that where you can get it. If you commute 40 minutes to work and your bug out bag is at home in the closet, and you and your wife, your loved ones, whatever, are not at home, and as I talked about in the beginning, things can go bad a lot faster than you think. Things can go from a normal functioning society to chaos fast. Does it make sense to go all the way home to get your bug out bags? You might make it home, and then that's when gridlock hits. It takes you 45 minutes to get home, and you get home and it takes you 10 minutes to pack. That's an hour after a major disaster. You may not be able to get out again in a vehicle. Give some serious thought to keeping that bug out bag or a bug out bag in your vehicle. If you've listened, you'll know I'm a fan of the baby bug out bag, the sling bag. The idea of that is it's so convenient to just have wherever I am within sprinting distance. I don't wear it all the time, but it's easy to have and take with me. If I'm going with somebody else in their car, just grab it and throw it in the car. It's a small bag. It's not as good as a big bug out bag, but it's way better than nothing. Again, I've done a whole episode on that. Full-size fighting handgun, extra ammo, medical, water filter, GPS, all kinds of things in a small, basketball-sized sling bag. I'm actually looking at it. It's at my feet right now. But have some kind of supplies with you where you are. Talking about a cache and something like this, you literally could have an old duffel bag depending on where you work. If you're living that cubicle life, have an extra empty drawer. You could literally have an old duffel bag that you get at Goodwill or you just have lying around, filled with stuff. Don't go crazy. I'm not telling you to have like an M67 fragmentation grenade in your office drawer. But have some food, have some calories, have some emergency Coast Guard rations, that extra footwear we talked about, a case of ramen noodles, some tuna fish, whatever. A couple of boxes of Quest protein, whatever you're into. The point I'm trying to get across is you should have some kind of supplies where you are. Because I know that a lot of people, and me included when I lived in the city, may commute quite a ways from where you live, your domicile, to your place of work. If that is you, really be circumspect and consider that. If things go down, are you even going to be able to make it home? Are you just going to go home because that's where all your stuff is and that's dangerous because you may not get out again? Because, again, gridlock. Think about how long that takes on a normal day. Let's say it takes you 35 minutes. Do you remember a day when there was a ton of traffic? How long did that take you? What about on a day when not everybody, the vast majority of people are freaking out? They are running around like chickens without their heads cut off. How long might it take you then? You should have some supplies in your vehicle, even in your office. Again, I know what it can be like in a big metropolitan area. Sometimes you have to park quite a ways away. I think you should have some food and stuff stored up at your house, but I think you should have some close to where you are. And this is more of a prepping 2.0. Like, I assume that you have some food stored up. I assume you have guns and ammo. On the urban survival guns, I do an entire other podcast, Gunfighter Life. If you're not subscribed to that one, maybe you want to if you're into guns. But I don't want to turn this into a gun episode. There are many listeners, by God's grace, listen all over the world. Maybe having, that battle rifle or that shotgun is not feasible for them. But you can go back and search gunfighter life. If you just type in survival, if you go to like Spreaker, there should be a thing when you click in that podcast to search inside that podcast. There is an entire episode on urban survival guns. But transporting that principle we just talked about on guns, better to have the SIG 320 on your hip if things really get bad than the fully loaded Springfield M1A that's locked home in your gun safe 30 miles away when there's looting and civil unrest and murder and mayhem going on your block at work. So really think about that. Also did another episode on truck guns, or trunk guns depending on your vehicle. But the principle there, have something with you. You may know from the bio from listening that I was a private contractor. Sometimes in very secure facilities, they would not let us have our privately owned guns. They had little lockers. We would have to lock our guns in there. When we got into the secure facility, they would give us, and it's I don't want to sound like James Bond, like it's classified, but it's literally classified. They would give us stuff when we got into the secure location. Was it a pain in the butt? Did a lot of people not even bother? The point of that is it was the pain in the butt. But at least if something happened, I had a gun when I left that secure facility. Was it a pain in the butt to take it and lock it in the locker and get there early and go through all the stuff every day to do that? Yeah, a pain in the butt. But if something happened en route or leaving, I wanted to be armed. Do what you have to do, I would say, to have a gun in your proximity. The closer the better. On you, best. Again, that high-point carbine in your trunk with a couple of mags. If you need a gun there where you are, that's way better than having the Daniel Defense kitted up AR-15 locked in your gun safe. If you're in a fight for your life there, that gun may as well be on the moon. You should have something under your dominion and control. There's an active shooter at your workplace or wherever you are. That gun at home, again, useless to you. It's maybe an investment, but it's not a usable tool because it's not where you can use it. You could apply that principle to other things if, again, you're somewhere where you aren't afforded the right to have a firearm. The knife in your pocket is better than the machete at home. So whether it's a bug out bag or a gun or a knife, have supplies on you. Food. Also another episode that I did an entire episode on, bug out indicators. And this comes from real world experience. This is coming from somebody who's actually bugged out before and somebody who's actually dealt with civil unrest. I love my wife. She recently wanted to go spend some time with her family in Florida. She's got little nieces and nephews. She wanted to see them for a little bit. I don't really consider anywhere east of the Mississippi ideal for any kind of survival scenario. There are very few exceptions. But before we went back east, before we crossed that Mississippi, and I would even prefer the Missouri west of that, but especially the Mississippi, just population density. I consider that kind of all one big, you go from city to suburb to city. And my definition, if I can go and look out and see a building, I consider that a city. So, before we went back east, we literally sat down and talked about and recorded what our bug out indicators are. You should have this with your family, with your loved one, or with you, with yourself, because you might at the time be debating, oh, should I, shouldn't I? Again, not the time to be running around like a chicken with your head cut off. you should have set bug out indicators. And you can go back and listen to that episode too. I don't want to rehash that whole episode in this episode, but just a couple of examples. If there is nationwide civil unrest, bug out. If there is localized civil unrest in our area, not like it's happening in Minneapolis, but it's happening where we are, time to bug out. The grid has gone down, and we have reason to believe it won't be back up in the next 48 hours. Time to bug out. I'm not saying these have to be your bug out indicators. I'm saying you should have bug out indicators. Any city in the United States gets hit with a nuclear weapon at any time. That's a bug out indicator for me. Have bug out indicators and have them have a rational, calm conversation when everything is good with your loved ones, with your family, that they agree to. So that when it happens, you're not arguing with them, trying to get them out of the door. So there's not this normality bias, confirmation bias. And I've seen people go through this. They don't want to admit things are as bad as they are. Have them agree beforehand to a reasonable bug out indicator. You can't make it something ridiculous like, gas goes up another 25 cents, we're bugging out. Like, we live in a time of inflation. Gas is probably going to go up. I'm talking about realistic bug out indicators. You have those, and maybe it's a conjunction. Maybe if 3 out of the 5 or 7 out of the 10, whatever it is, or this one by itself. But have those ahead of time so you can say, hey, these are our pre-agreed upon indicators. You're not arguing. That is not the time to be arguing. Along with that, you need SOPs. I talked about having a bug out plan. You need other SOPs. Like if we're both at work and we both know the best way to bug out of the city is to go west, again using that analogy, and we work 30 miles west of home, if something really bad happens, we don't go home to get grandma's fine china. Let it burn if it has to. It's not as precious as human life. Naked you came into this world, and naked you're going out of this world. And that goes for you if you're a man listening to this. Something bad happens, you don't go home for the gun safe. You have an SOP. If you're both at work, you leave from work. You go to that panic azimuth and you go west and you meet up at whatever rally point. If it turns out to be nothing, a flash in the pan, then you go home and get your stuff. But if it does, again, it's better to bug out a month too early than a minute too late. I think we underestimate the great advantage that fossil fuel is. If you think about the amount of energy of somebody that routinely goes hiking and carrying a pack, think about, honestly, how far and how much cargo you can carry with 1 gallon of gas. Let's say you have a gas guzzling machine and you get 12 miles to the gallon. Think about how long it takes you to ruck 12 miles with a pack, assuming no other obstacles, assuming no violent confrontations, no river crossings, no giant changes in altitude, no treacherous terrain. Just a fairly nice walk on a trail. Think about how long it takes to ruck a big pack 12 miles. Think about how much easier it's going to be to get out if you can drive than walk. You should have a plan to walk also, but again, gridlock is a real thing in cities. And you know how fast, if you live in a city, how fast that can accumulate. Anyway, have those SOPs so you're not trying to figure it out at the time. Another thing, you should assume that communications are going to go down. In big events where everybody's trying to communicate, disasters, civil unrest, mass casualty events, active shooter events, comms often go down because so many people are trying to use whatever you want to call it, the networks, that it goes down. So you need a no comms plan. You need signals, command and signal. You need those established beforehand. I've talked about this before, but this is something my wife and I actually did when we lived in these cities. We would carry in our vehicles, her in her trunk, some really odd colors of spray paint, like something you wouldn't normally see tagged in a city. Like she had like a very vibrant lavender purple, and I had like a very obnoxious green color. We could use that to communicate if we went to one of our rally points. It wasn't safe to stay there, and we moved on to the next one, because again, SOPs. We had that marked. We would mark that. We would just hit that with a color, and we could easily look at that. Say, she's been here, she's moved on. Or he's been here, he's moved on. We're not just waiting at that rally point. But a simple, easy way to communicate. But that's just one example of an SOP. Standard operating procedure. Have them beforehand. Have a plan beforehand. In a disaster is not the time to be figuring out what you're going to do, where you're going to go. You may have to adjust on the fly. That's a real thing. Be flexible. Be able to adapt, use the brain that you've been given. If for whatever reason your plan is a really bad plan, there's like a glaringly obvious reason. We thought we were going to the country here, but for whatever reason that's a really bad idea. Then you switch on the fly, but at least have a plan to start with. And again, have an alternate, contingency, emergency. Seems like there's been a lot of tips in this episode, so probably going to forego the tactical tip of the day. If you thought any of this information was worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, if you just want to support the podcast, consider going to Patreon and becoming a patron. Mostly because you support the message, you want to support the message, you believe in it, you thought the information was worth something, maybe worth more than the next shiny thing you're going to buy on Amazon, and you want to help support the show. Also, a very real benefit, I hope, I share my actual bug out locations. If you don't know, I live as a neo-nomad with my wife. We travel all over the country, and we have for years, and I have kind of since I was 18. Joining the military, and I've been all over the country. I've been to, I believe, 48 of the 50 states and lived in a lot of them. And I like to go exploring on my time off. I literally just posted one a few days ago of when I recorded this. I don't know when you're going to listen, but I record them quite frequently. I recently did another trek across country from Florida to where I am now, the Redout, and plan to travel from here, northern Idaho, to Alaska. I share with the patrons actual good bug out locations. Like really good, what I would consider survivable, with water sources, with food resources, safe. I share with them actual coordinates. Like you can actually go there. Many, many bug out locations. The last one I just found. Beautiful, beautiful area. Didn't see a single person in the entire area. Found a good cave. Found a good creek with water. Lots of forageable food. Lots of edible plants. There are deer there. There are bighorn sheep there. Anyway, that was just one example. There are many, many bug out locations I share on there. So if you want access to that alone, that ought to be worth becoming a patron, $5 a month. In addition to all the other insider content that you get. Anyway, consider becoming a patron. You'll be supporting what I consider a ministry to make godly men strong and strong men godly. American, veteran, combat veteran, operated small business. Anyway, consider becoming a patron. With that, on the bug out, one verse really comes to mind. And I know I've probably said it before as a tactical verse of the day, but really, let this sink in. Come out of her, my people. You'll find this in Revelation 18. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Men, come out of her, my people, of Babylon. And I don't mean that so much as a physical locality. It certainly can be. But I mean mentally. Come out of her, my people. Be set apart. Be holy. How many times is it written, you shall be holy, for I am holy? Holy means set apart. Now you could be set apart physically out in the country and be lusting after sinful things in the city. Come out in spirit, in mind. Be separate. Come out of her, my people. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.